Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Dispatch Podcast, episode 65. My name is Cameron English, your host as always, joined again by Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's great to be with you. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent as the afternoon progresses. So I'm a happy camper.
I like it. Beautiful. Chuck's always uplifting. When I need motivation, I go to Dr. Dinnerstein for that. And it's a good thing that we're both in a good mood because we have an interesting topic to discuss today in sort of a gross way. I want to say it's everybody's favorite topic, and that is pornography. And this is a story I wrote for the website just a few days ago. And it's going to be, we'll be as balanced as we can here, and we'll try to keep the puns to a minimum, but no promises. So here's the title. The title is Porn Bad for You? A Skeptical Look at NPR's Dismissive Answer. So up here at the top in the summary, I write, a subset of men is giving up internet porn on the grounds that it's physically and psychologically harmful, overlooking much of the relevant science. NPR, National Public Radio, if you're not clear on that, claims this movement promotes, quote, a set of unproven claims about the benefits of masturbation abstinence. Let's examine the research NPR chose to ignore. So the thrust of this article, or what motivated it for me, is that NPR wrote this story, and the focus of it wasn't so much what the science says about the topic more generally. It had a political spin, which when it comes to public health is usually a bad idea. And the focus was there's this group of men, I don't know how big it is, it's probably in the millions if I had to guess, but there's this subculture of people online who are avoiding pornography, and they have communities where they go. There's subreddits and there's websites and there's online forums and so forth, where people get together and they work with each other. It's almost like a 12-step. It's not exactly that, but you have people that say, I did it, now let me show you how to do it, and here's the benefits. And NPR's frustration seems to be that you can find people making unfounded claims. So you'll see a 17-year-old on YouTube saying that he has superpowers and he can swim in super cold water, and it all stems from his no longer masturbating to internet porn. So obviously that claim is kind of silly, but NPR is taking this as sort of an indicator of the kind of claims that you see in these communities. And then, of course, they went in the political direction and saying, well, there's right-wing extremists in these movements, and it's one small step from masturbation abstinence, what they call NoFap, which is a phrase Chuck learned just this week. People go from this kind of a community to right-wing politics. And we can talk about that, I suppose. It's not really my primary interest here. But what I was frustrated by is that there's a whole wealth of research on this topic, and it's decidedly mixed. I don't think it's very clear in every case the impact that porn has from a scientific perspective. But NPR ignored just about all of that. And they focused on, they quoted a few experts, and they quoted they cited 3 or 4 studies that had been done. But it was a very limited look at the topic, with the implication being that this is what the evidence tells us. And so that was my frustration.
I think you're correct. I think that when I read the NPR piece and I read your piece, I think that there was a divergence there. NPR really had some political axes that they wanted to grind in terms of talking about this whole, I guess it would be like an incel celibate culture that has been associated with the right wing of our political spectrum, and I think that they focused more on that and gave short shrift to this whole discussion of how pornography has changed our social values over the last 20, 30 years. Again, because I'm old, and all we had was Playboy, and it wasn't even that you could go out and buy a copy. You had to get it from an older brother or somebody else to see it. And of course, we only were looking for the articles, because there's nothing more important than reading some of the actually truly great material.
What's her favorite food? What bands does she like? These are the questions we all need answers to.
Exactly. And so, this was one of the trains that left the station after I had left the station long ago. Was the arrival of internet porn. Now, I will say that I think from a biological point of view that men are hardwired visually when it comes to sex. And women, and this is a generalization, are more wired in terms of the emotional nurturing context of this. So that the internet, which is primarily a visual media, was a great place for porn to find a new home. And as with many things on the internet, porn has led the way. It's led the way on commercializing websites. It's led the way on 3D, virtual reality, anything you wish. Porn has led the way. So you have to take into account that something is going on there. And I think that it has a lot to do with just how we were wired evolutionarily and then exposed to the internet, which was not part of the plan originally.
The part that was most frustrating and again, it's not that I want to avoid politics. It's just that there's a more important focus here, I think. And, like you could look at any community, if you wanted to take left-wing politics and you go, oh, look, there's this dark underbelly of the internet where there's people fantasizing about murdering their political opponents, right? Yes, that goes on for sure. But is that a reflection of the typical person who votes for left-leaning politicians or who supports progressive agenda items, right? That's the point I was bothered by, is that, you're taking the exceptions and you're going, well, here's the rule for this community. And it's frustrating because I think this is a real issue for a lot of people, for my age group, my age cohort and younger, because this stuff, as you alluded to, this content is everywhere. You can get a few clicks of the mouse, few taps on your phone, and there is just a treasure. Maybe that's the wrong word. There is an abundance of pornography. Anything that you want to see, there's someone who's made a video of people doing that for money. It's just, it's unbelievable. But a lot of the research, which you will see people saying, I watched this stuff in my teenage years, and then when I started dating, it was pretty clear, women don't like to be treated the way they're treated in these films. And, the high that I would get from watching this stuff is nothing like actually having sex. So what you see then, and this is repeated over in a lot of this research, and it's longitudinal, which is interesting. So they follow kids as they watch this, and as they grow up, then they report, how does this impact your relationships? And a lot of people will say, I'm experiencing symptoms of erectile dysfunction, and I'm 29. And as Chuck can speak to this, that's very uncommon in that age group, unless there's an extenuating circumstance. And then you see people reporting, I split up with my wife because I couldn't stop watching this stuff and she felt neglected or she was angry, whatever, right? Now, I'm not saying, and again, just to try to qualify this, I'm not saying that if you watch this stuff, I don't want to do the reefer madness of porn here and say, if you watch this, your life is over and you're going to start laughing hysterically before you die or whatever, right? But it seems to me those are the sort of questions that would be worth pursuing for a journalist or for a news outlet like NPR, and all of that was glossed over. So, yeah.
Well, exactly. I think, certainly, much like Playboy did, it creates false expectations, but it does it at a far greater scale and magnitude than Playboy was able to conjure. And I think as a result, it does, those false expectations course in relationships because it's just not, it ain't real, and those are significant issues to society moving forward, irrespective of what you think about pornography by itself. Can we draw a direct link between that and domestic violence? No, but we do have an increase in domestic violence that can be attributed to pornography, among many other reasons. It's interesting to it would be interesting to have these social scientists from Match and those other companies that spend a lot of time and effort and money understanding that process of dating and mating, begin to dive a little bit more deeply into the pornography that's not on their website, but is something that the people that use their website use. I mean, I think it would be an interesting scientific thing to learn, because what I've read in the past about how we find a mate has changed dramatically over the last century. Most people found their mates within a block or two of where they lived in the 30s, where they lived. Because that they had neighborhoods where they ran into people. It was in the 50s and 60s that whole dating experience kind of moved to the workplace. You know, I'm a classic doctor that married a nurse. You know, kind of thing. And then, there's policemen and nurses and firemen and that all those first responder types. But it's much different now, and I have not a clue because I'm an old person as to how that gets done.
It's the digital aspect of it is really fascinating, and it's something we need to learn more about. And just to underscore how difficult it is to get a sense of how this medium affects people, there was some years ago, there was a research team, I forget the details, but they were trying to do a clinical trial to find out the impacts of porn, and they had to delay their study and rearrange the design because they couldn't find enough people who had not watched porn.
We're porn naive.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to a drug or a vaccine or some sort of medical intervention, it's not easy, but it's relatively simple to set up the trial, because you go, these are the people we're giving the drug to, these are the people we're not. Right? What happens? What's the difference? You just can't do it with porn because it's. Everyone's always heard they've heard that joke, right? The internet is for porn. And that's not far off. The estimates vary, but it's somewhere between like 4 to 30% of the internet. And that's a lot, right? How much stuff is on the internet? What's 4% of the entire internet? Just to take the...
And you know that any guilty husband or boyfriend will immediately tell you that the mouse just clicked there. It wasn't, it just happened to appear. It was like magic.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but that's an interesting point, though, because a lot of people, and in the comment section, I got a little bit of this, people saying, well, this is psychological research, it's inherently subjective, so until they give us better studies, I'm going to keep watching porn, right? Follow the science, But the thing that's interesting is that when people do these studies, if they're willing to, and they're usually anonymized, so you don't know, like, this is Jim from Canton, Ohio, and he likes whatever, right? That's not what happens. But people will participate in these studies, and not only will they say, I watch porn, but I'm experiencing erectile dysfunction. If anything, that seems to suggest that this research, in many cases, has overcome the social desirability bias. Because as we talk about with food, like we talk about the NHANES data, Chuck, and people will report that they eat so little that if it were true, they would die. So we know that those numbers are often not reliable. But in a study where people are willing to tell you, I watch this and I'm experiencing this problem, that at least to me would suggest that it's real enough that people are concerned and they want to at least find out what's going on. So any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, I think we covered it as delicately as we might. But I think it's an interesting area that there's very little science being done and reported, which says something all by itself, because there's lots of things that they report on that, they've been reporting on the same fact for 25 years. Maybe we can do something new.
This just in, blueberries prevent Alzheimer's.
Yes. From the Blueberry Council.
Right. Yep, there's always a miracle vegetable out there that CNN will tell you about. Okay, well we will stick with this. It's something that I've taken an interest in. So I'm going to write about it more, and we'll see what happens as more studies come out. But there you go, awkward topic, which we handled reasonably delicately, I think, Chuck. So until we're back with the next episode, follow us on social media. It's at ACSH.org on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. I am at CamJEnglish, and if you want to get a hold of Chuck, email the organization. If you ask him a question, he'll answer it. If you want to fight with him, just be nice, and maybe he'll dialogue with you a little bit. So. With that, we are all done. See you next time.